I'm Ankita from Pune Knowledge Cluster, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all for a Health Talk series from Pune Knowledge Cluster. This series aims to promote active discussion around health issues, identifying health issues, and impact of disease around at a city level. And today we have a very wonderful guest with us, speaker, Mr. Sachin Dubey. He is CEO and co-founder of Module Innovations. So I will first give a brief introduction about him, and then I will give a brief on Pune Knowledge Cluster, and then we'll start the talk. So Mr. Sachin is co-founder and CEO of Module Innovations, an innovative and path-breaking diagnostic company with a focus on infectious diseases and antimicrobial resistance. Prior to Module, Sachin was involved with NCL for technology commercialization. He was awarded the IIGP 2.0 award for being amongst the top 10 innovators of India in 2017. He has been the project leader for several projects funded by DST, DBT, BIREC, Nesta UK, BMGF Grand Challenges, Canada, Tata Trust, Carbex, USA. As a CEO, Sachin led Module to receive the prestigious Carbex funding of US $3 million, making it the first and only diagnostic company in Asia to receive Carbex funds. He did his BTech and MTech in nanotechnology from the Center of Converging Technologies, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur, and has an executive education under IIGP 2.0 from IIM Ahmedabad. So welcome, Mr. Sachin. It's a pleasure to have you as a speaker at PKC. I'll give a brief about Pune Knowledge Cluster, and then we'll start the presentation. So Pune Knowledge Cluster is established by Office of Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India in 2020 under the Knowledge and Innovation Cluster Initiative. It's amongst the 6 knowledge cluster initiatives, one of the 6 knowledge clusters in India. PKC is hosted by Inter-University Center of Astronomy and Astrophysics, Pune. PKC aim of PKC is to bring academic institutions, research institutions, industries of Pune and its surrounding to solve the city level problem and regional problem through the innovative means using scientific knowledge and engaging highly skilled human resources. So what we do at PKC, we collaborate with multi-organizations to conceptualize, implement, and identify the studies and projects. We also engage citizens at different platforms to build their capacity. And also we have we identify, validate, and pilot technology and innovation and their adoption. And we also do planning and strategy decisions with vision documents and white papers and research papers. So we can see that we have a list of collaborators and partners with PKC. There are funding organizations, academic research organizations, industries, government bodies, labs, incubation centers, NGOs, societies, and international organizations. We do collaborate with all of them. PKC mainly works under 5 verticals like health, sustainable environment, sustainable mobility, capacity building, and big data. Under health, we do collaborate with different academic institutions, research institutions, government departments to generate data for different sero surveys, clinical, immunological, environmental surveillance, and to create an epidemiological database at a city level and Pune region level. In sustainable environment, we focus on securing water, food, livelihood, and increase vegetation cover in the city. Under sustainable mobility, we apply scientific knowledge and technical tools to address rapidly and changing mobility requirements of the city. For big data and AI, we have a citizen science program. It's an interactive web-based program to encourage citizens to participate in scientific activities and big data. Under capacity building, we do collaborate with different institutes, different academic institutions, and we involve young researchers for interdisciplinary training programs. We promote STEM education, and we do have scholarship programs for women in chemistry and science. So you can see a snapshot of our key achievements like funds we have received, MOUs we have signed, partnership with the organization, international collaborations, and number of projects funded externally. Our team is comprises of Professor Ajit Kembhavi and Professor L.S. Shashidhara are our principal investigator and co-principal investigator respectively. Professor Shomak Rai Chaudhary is a director of IOCA, is a PKC implementing organization. Dr. Mashalkar is our chairman of our advisory committee. Ms. Rashmi Udvarshi and Ms. Anita are our senior advisor at PKC, and Dr. Priya Nagraj is our CEO. For health team, we have Ms. Priyanki Shah, Ms. Purnima, Ms. Niharika, and myself at PKC. So we are working under health vertical. So I'll request Mr. Sachin to start his presentation and deliver a talk. And I hope you all will like this presentation, and it would be a very knowledgeable and informative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ankita, for that wonderful introduction. And of course, we would want to also thank PKC for all the work that PKC has been doing. And also, at some point, PKC did support our COVID project doing the validations. So I would like to share my screen with everybody. I hope I am pretty much audible. Okay. Yeah, Ankita, you can see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you everybody for joining this session. I wish we had a PKC session 10 years earlier when I was embarking on this journey of being an entrepreneur. But nevertheless, I hope this will be a useful session for everybody who wants to be an entrepreneur and is interested in developing diagnostics for infectious diseases. So my name is Sachin Dubey, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of this company called Model Innovations, which was earlier based at Venture Center, which is the incubator of NCL. And now we moved out into our own premises, into our own larger offices. So before embarking on the journey of Module and how we developed some of the world's first diagnostic devices, I sort of always relate the entrepreneurship journey akin to the stages of a rocket. So I'm also very fascinated by how the space science works, and that's how I do an analogy of entrepreneurship with rocket stages. And this is how I will take you all through the journey of how a rocket from being built launches a satellite into space. Similarly, how we develop the products for diagnostics and launch them eventually into the market. So the first instance of how this all got started dates back to me coming for an engineering internship at NCL. So I think most of you are from Pune and you might be knowing the CSIR National Chemical Laboratory very well. As an engineering student, I and my co-founder, we came to Pune to finish our internships. And during that time, we started to work on very different kind of materials. So eventually in these slides, you will also see how being into an interdisciplinary background and how we started to connect the dots of linking the technology that we were working for a very different application into something which you see as products that have been developed at Module. So the trigger of course came from working here. Some things that many aspiring entrepreneurs who are either doing their PhDs or are students would also see, that you will have to decide onto the path that you want to choose. So even I had a PhD opportunity in the US, in Germany, but eventually the entrepreneur bug bit me and I decided to chase the dream and took the hard path. So this is the lab which I joined. So I joined the lab of Dr. Jyoti Jog, which is into a division called as polymer science and engineering. So I actually came from a very interdisciplinary background. I mean, we had, subjects as vast as nanotechnology and as vast as neuroscience, computer programming, all embedded into our course. So when I actually joined Dr. Jog's lab, something that I realized was the kind of freedom that she gave me. Of course, as an entrepreneur, if you're trying to actually understand the problems on which you want to work, you will have to have an open mind. Also, you would see later into the slides and into presentations that an open mind is very important. Some kind of differences do exist between scientists and entrepreneurs, and that is what over the years I learned and evolved myself. So at this institute at NCL, we were actually working on a very different technology, which was color changing polymers. Now the slide that you see here was actually a problem that came from companies like ITC, who were making at that point of time cigarettes, but many other companies, they came to NCL to see that can they make any kind of feature which sort of authenticates if the product is original and has not been tampered with. So at that moment we started working on this project, which was a polymer based system which actually changed color basis number of stimuli. Now in the slides that you see, the stimuli for a cigarette or for a box like a mobile phone box was actually heat. As soon as you provided any kind of heat or temperature to it, it changed its color. So we were actually able to develop these very novel engineered polymers, and we filed a lot of patents onto that. But the lab that I was working in was completely devoted into the area of materials, polymers, and solar cells and things like that. But because I had a strong background rather to say in biology, I wondered, can this actually be extrapolated to something in life sciences or something that can be used in diagnosing different kinds of conditions? And that's how eventually we started to build on to a very different product. So this is how we started actually to connect the dots from one problem or one solution that was available for a different set altogether into a different area. So with this thought and with this energy, this idea, we literally started the company, and it was incorporated on 3rd of June 2014. So here actually you see all the early well-wishers, people, friends, families, and you might see a lot of familiar faces. You might see Dr. Premnath from Venture Center. So this was actually the first lab, or so to say the office that we started with, which was around 100 to 150 square feet. Not to say a typical garage, but not a very great hi-fi lab as well. But the whole journey actually started from this wonderful ecosystem at Venture Center. And then eventually when we started to move forward, what we realized that, okay, we have a technology, but where exactly do we think it can be implemented? So the unmet need, or so to say, what exactly is the problem, was very important for us to identify. And eventually at parallel, a personal incident did happen. So back in the year around 2014 and 2015, a family member who was actually pregnant at that moment encountered urinary tract infection. Because I am from Jaipur, Jaipur is a fairly large city, the diagnostic systems that took the sample of urine and eventually gave the outcome were actually a lot of time consuming procedures. So eventually the clinician, they gave a broad spectrum antibiotic, but it did not work very well. So they had to actually go for urine culture, which of course took more time, and the whole treatment cycle was actually delayed during the condition of pregnancy. So this opened up our eyes onto the problem of urinary tract infection. Now when we decided to go deeper into the problem of UTI to actually understand the unmet need and the gravity of the problem, we found that this actually is a huge problem. There are 150 million people who suffer with urinary tract infection worldwide every year, which is a staggering number. Now, because of course of the anatomy of the female's urinary tract, they are more prone to get UTI, which means that 60% of the women will suffer with UTI once in their lifetime. 1 in 3 women under the age of 24 will contract a UTI. So that is actually a big number. Now, of course, the problem does exist, but the problem of UTI is actually not the problem. The problem is that we do not have better, faster, and point of care diagnostic systems which can with confidence say that, hey, the patient actually has a urinary tract infection and it is because of a particular organism. Now, another fact that emerged from our understanding of the gravity of the problem was in 70% of the cases where antibiotics they need to be given, they are all empirical, which means they're all based on the prudent judgment of the doctor, but without any evidence. And surprisingly, in 30% of the cases, the prescription, so the antibiotics were not needed at all. So the patients actually had an antibiotic because of the suspicion of UTI, which I would take you further in the slides, that eventually is also causing another problem called as antimicrobial resistance. So we understood the problem, the landscape of the current diagnostic system. So we had dipsticks which have a very poor sensitivity. We then have microscopy based diagnosis of UTI which needs a trained manpower, and then eventually we have culture which would take at least 1 to 2 days in a proper hospital in city, and if it's a remote setting it might take up to 5 days for the outcome to come. So we definitely understood the gravity of the problem, but we were trying to develop solutions not only for somebody in my family who hails from a city, but also for people like the lady here who hails from a very rural background and has access to only primary healthcare centers. So in this picture, the doctor that you see, Dr. Dhirendra Sharma, who is also a part of the team at Module, explained the gravity in terms of how robust the test should be, how easy the test should be, and how affordable the test has to be if it has to make real impact. So with all these inputs, we sort of outlined the target product profile. So in diagnostics, of course, there is a term called as target product profile, which means that what are your targets in terms of the product's performance and its specification, which you would eventually want. So moving ahead, we wanted the test for UTI to be, of course, rapid. Rapid in the sense it has to be ultra rapid with results in as short as 30 minutes, which usually is a typical time of interaction when the patient enters in the hospital or a clinical setting and takes the final prescription from the doctor. The second important feature that we always wanted to incorporate was affordability. So if it has to impact people living in India where access to healthcare is dismal, the product has to be affordable. The third feature was, of course, it has to be easy to use, because if I talk about a primary healthcare center, it's only a doctor and a nurse or a compounder in some cases. So the test has to be such that it can be, it is something that even a layman can do it, the patient can do it themselves, or the patient or the clinical setting having a minimally trained person can operate the test. And importantly, we wanted this test to work on site. So essentially the patient need not go all the way to a city to get the test done, but the test must come back or must come to the patient themselves. With all these features, we started to build our first prototypes. So in the diagnostic sector, it is very important to actually make your early versions of the product. Typical terminology which you might all know is called as minimum viable product, which is something that you can showcase to the external world. Of course, this need not to be a very perfect product, but having the minimum features, something that can be showcased, something which helps you visualize how the product would eventually look when it becomes a finished product. So we started to build our first version of the product, and this I called as the second stage of the rocket moving up, which is called as the lift off. So we started building this product which is called as USense. So USense is Module's flagship product, which identifies if the patient has a urinary tract infection or not, and if yes, what kind of pathogen it is. So the technology now that we were working back at NCL during my internship days was eventually getting translated into a product in the healthcare space. So at that time, it was a completely different area or an application that we were targeting. Now this was completely different area. But because of the interdisciplinary background, we were actually able to connect the dots. Now this you see is actually a very small device which looks, which in dimension is very much equivalent to a credit card. The four corners were specific to four bacteria that it intended to target, which were Klebsiella, Staph aureus, E. coli, and Enterococci. These four organisms were the major cause of UTIs, and they accounted for almost 95% cases of UTI in the IPD, in the OPD settings. So we incorporated these four features of being rapid. So the results here were available in 30 to 60 minutes. It was, of course, a very easy to use test. It had a colorimetric readout. It needed no lab or instrument. The target was also to make it affordable, and importantly, it was also trying to identify which bacteria it is. Now, another thing that I would want to bring in right here before I move forward is the thought process differences between scientists and entrepreneurs. So I began my journey of entrepreneurship as a scientist, and I can very well relate the kind of mistakes, the kind of fixities in my mind that I had. So as scientists, if I think many of you would relate to that, as scientists, we are often in blind love with our work. So when I was sort of advised by a lot of industry people that I came in contact with that you are in blind love with your work, it sort of hit my ego. It had an impression that, okay, hey, my technology is great, it is going to work and things like that. But over the course in the journey, I realized that yes, this is not right. Of course, you should be in deep love with your work, but you should also be receptive and open to understanding the views of the actual users. So what the blind love does, that we are actually non-perceptive to what the reality is, and therefore a reality check is a must. So before we started to develop the product, we actually went and interacted with a lot of potential customers, which included, of course, a lot of doctors, a lot of labs, a lot of hospitals, and the decision makers who actually procure these systems. So there were, of course, a lot of inputs by which you would also see that there would come another term called as pivot or iterations. So that is very important, right? Understanding the customers or the users' perception of the product and the need is very, very important. So again, there was another third point I would want to say, that what we do in lab will not essentially sell, and markets, they respond very differently. So please keep all these factors in mind before you start developing your own diagnostic tests and embark on this journey. And also, don't work in silos. So it is very important to actually cross function. Now at module we have a team that varies from backgrounds in biology, in chemistry, in engineering, in marketing, clinicians, designers, and whatnot. So so this is what over the course we realized, that don't try to perfect everything yourself. There are people available, and then work with them and don't work in silos. So another term which became important to us and which we realized soon was pivot. So although we had a product which worked fine, 30 to 60 minute diagnostic time, but still in the actual healthcare setting, there is no the 30 to 60 minute time frame is actually long, because the interaction time of the patient with the clinician is sort of 15 to 20 minutes, and that is when you need to deliver the results. Otherwise it eventually goes back to the same cycle where the results are delivered after a day, and it doesn't really make any kind of an impact. So we also incorporated these feedbacks and pivoted from the original version of the product and changed sort of the technology and the form factor of the product, and we eventually came up with another version of uSense which looks something like this, and this is what actually is out. So we started to listen to users and incorporated the improvements. Now this actually gives the results in as short as 15 minutes. So 5 to 15 minutes is the time frame where you can actually see the results. It also has a colorimetric readout, and therefore it does not need a lab or an instrument, and it is very low cost compared to the culture. So this actually fits very well into the clinical pathway, and this helps the clinician to actually triage the patient, that if they have a UTI, then to continue giving antibiotic, and if they don't have an UTI, then they don't need to give or take any kind of antibiotic. So this is what USense, the newer version of USense, actually brought into the place. Another important parameter which during the development of a diagnostic test becomes important is its performance and its comparison with the gold standard. So because USense is actually determining or telling you the presence of bacteria in urine, it was compared head-on with the gold standard, which is culture in our case, and all the clinical validations that were done internally, that were done externally with hospital partners, they were done comparing the USense test with the gold standard culture. Now there are three important factors which every diagnostic test will have to have, which is sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. Sensitivity, of course, you guys must be knowing, is essentially the true positive, detection of the true positives by the test. Specificity is the detection of true negatives, and accuracy means correctly detecting the diseased condition or correctly detecting the non-diseased condition. So these parameters are actually of great importance for any kind of diagnostic test, and if they the closer they are to 100%, the better your test is, and the better the acceptance of the test is by the market, because eventually if this is being sold to clinicians or to hospital settings, they would ask these questions and they would want it to be as closer to the gold standard if possible. So eventually we developed the product USense. This is a fairly simple test. Now we are also trying to introduce it as a home use test. So very soon, maybe I think by the end of this year, you might also be able to buy it over the counter. So this is a 15-minute test. It can work on site. It is going to be very affordable when it comes to you as an individual, and has a sensitivity specificity of over 95%, which means if you feel that you have symptoms of UTI, you can test for yourself and then go to the clinician with a confirmed output that you have a UTI or you don't have a UTI. So the third stage eventually in the journey of any product or any company, or so to say in the journey of rocket, is the payload separation, where your product which was being developed and cocooned into the lab moves out for external validation. So this stage is called payload separation, and here you see the earlier version of USense being validated in a community of people who do not have access or great access to healthcare. Of course, this is an area which is nearer, which is in Pune, but they do have access. But then if this test through camp or something like that comes to them, then they really can get the test done. And there was a continuous output that we received from segments like these, that the patients would sort of tend to subside their pain of urinary tract infection until it becomes so immense that they have no option but to go to a doctor. And at that point, the bacteria would rather climb up the kidneys, and it can even lead to a much graver condition called as sepsis. So this constant feedback which was coming was again strengthened our belief that the product has to be robust, and it has to be so simple that it can actually go into the community, and it can go to people who really need them. They can get the testing done. A lot of people also commented that they people like the ones that you see here. So if they had to take a day's leave from their job, so essentially these people are daily wage earners, and if they have to take a day's leave to eventually go get themselves tested and again go for the results the next day, it is like a loss to them. And because of reasons like these, they avoid getting themselves tested. So it was a very painful experience to hear these terms, and therefore the features that we wanted to incorporate into USense made more sense. So here you see in the image Maya, who is the CTO and one of the developers of the test, along with two people, and they see really happy faces because they were actually able to diagnose a negative test for themselves, and that's why they look happy. So moving forward, clinical validations of any test is important before you actually move on for doing The field trials or validations outside, you have to do the validations in your own setup. You need to mimic the conditions for whatever is relevant to your diagnostic test. So in our case, we were actually able to spike the urine samples with the bacteria. So module has a BSL-2 facility, and we handle pathogens of that grade. So we have that facility, and we used to spike these urine samples, the healthy urine samples, with these organisms, and eventually were able to actually see how the test does perform. And once we had this data of the performance of the test internally, we moved on for doing the external validation. So as you can see here, 85% of our external validations were done in the state of Maharashtra, and more precisely in Pune itself, and 15% of them were done in the state of Rajasthan. So in Pune, we did tie up with a lot of clinical partners, including hospitals from the government setup and a lot of private hospitals and diagnostic labs. And in Rajasthan, we worked very closely with one of the largest diagnostic chains to actually do the clinical testing. Doing a multi-centric trial is not necessary, but is important, because you get to see the actual performance of your test when it goes to a different geography. Now, for tests like the ones that we're developing, we actually needed to see how do they perform if there is a variation in the climate, the variation in the kind of diets that people actually take, because this is a urine based test, and a lot of food that you take affects the quality of your urine. So that was again an important parameter for us to test. So while developing the tests, we do need to consider these factors which are really important and which may affect the performance of the test. So in several conditions of the patient journey, like if the patient is actually suffering from earlier disease, if the patient is diabetic, if the patient is pregnant, and things like that, the quality or the output of the urine is actually affected. And we did find initially that there were some particular conditions where the urine sample was giving a false positive result, and eventually with time we were actually able to optimize those conditions. But as a suggestion, it would make great sense if you plan a multicentric trial in your journey of product development. Now actually moving forward with the kind of product regulations that are required. So now with the medical device rules 2017 coming into place a few years back, the scenario in India that governs the medical device has changed drastically. Of course, it has become more systematic, but then eventually it has also become very stringent. So the importance of internal validations and the clinical validations is exemplified by the way the process of product regulations works. So before you I think it is very important for a test developer to incorporate the regulatory framework right at the stage where they're actually in conceptualizing the product development. So when your the business team has identified the need, or you've identified the unmet need or the problem, and you've sort of zeroed down on how the technology would be into the product that you're trying to develop, you should also very carefully consider what kind of regulations will apply to your product. If you are trying to market in India, then you will be bound by the regulations from CDSCO and DCGI. If you are interested in the markets outside India, like US or Europe, then you will have to be governed by US FDA and CE that comes from Europe. So the slide that you see essentially entails the kind of procedures that were very relevant for USENS and are relevant for any product like that. So during the internal validation, which you can do in your lab or in your institution by mimicking the actual condition, you also must identify the product class. Right now, once you have done that, you should in parallel identify a clinical partner where you would be doing your external validations or the actual field trials. At that point, you must apply for a test license to CDSCO, and once that is in place, the study that you are doing would sort of make more sense, and it would also be, the data that you generate would be helpful for you to actually get the manufacturing license in the future. Once you're done with this study, then you move on to the clinical validations, final clinical validations with a clinical partner. You need to register the study with with CTRI by giving the SOPs, the procedures. And an important point, that if it is a novel device, which means that it is nowhere available in the world and it has no predicate or something similar, then in that case there is a clinical validation which needs to be done. Why I'm saying this is because USense is actually a very novel device and there is no predicate. So we have to do clinical validation. We did that. But if there is a predicate, say if you're just making another kind of pregnancy test, then of course this might not be needed. It could be just validation by any NABL accredited lab or lab identified by CDSCO. So once you're done with the clinical validations, eventually you identify the product parameters, the performance and everything like that. Then you eventually move to making the test yourself or identifying a partner who can make the test for you. Now in that case, you would need a manufacturing license or a sort of a loan license if you outsource manufacturing. But important point is that ISO 13485 is a mandatory requirement if it is a medical device, and if you don't have that in-house, then I would suggest you outsource the manufacturing of those tests to somebody who actually has the certifications in place. Now, so why it is important for us to understand the clinical pathway of how the products that we are making would eventually pan into. So this is in general the clinical pathway that we must have seen in our lives if anybody has a urinary tract infection earlier. So the patient feels they could have a UTI, they go to a clinic, they wait 15 to 30 minutes, the doctor meets them for roughly 5, 10, 15 minutes and gives an empirical prescription. Now, if it is a slightly better setting and if doctor feels, they could actually go and go forward with the culture and sensitivity test. And that's how the existing clinical pathway works. But what actually this is leading to is another problem of antimicrobial resistance. Of course, with COVID, we have seen that even for viral infection, a lot of us actually took a lot of antibiotics such as azithromycin because of any kind of pain that we had in our throats. So a lot of reports that are now coming say that during these 2-3 years, the rise in antimicrobial resistance has increased, and therefore we actually need to also tackle this problem, which is a global problem. And the gravity of the problem is understood by the fact that by 2050, if not controlled, this may lead to up to 10 million deaths. So to address this problem, there is another product which Module started developing. So this is at a stage where it will enter clinical validations, but this is aimed at actually identifying what antibiotics works the best. So in as short as 2 hours of time frame. So in entirety, if we look back at this pathway, the product USense fits perfectly during that wait time, and the clinician of course can take a very prudent judgment of giving an antibiotic or not. And if at all they would have decided to go for a culture and sensitivity test, we bring our solution AST Sense, the product number 2, which would give the same information in as short as 2 hours. So essentially the 2 to 3 days time frame of culture and sensitivity we have squeezed to 2 hours and 15 minutes. The next stage, or sort of the penultimate stage in the journey of a product, or again my favorite in the journey of the rocket, is when it actually launches the payload into the orbit. And this is where the product actually goes out in the open waters to be tested for its performance and user evaluation. So this is eventually the last stage. Then product, how does it perform in the market, how users take it, things like that. But there are some other considerations as well. So in your developmental journey, do consider these facts. Important: IP and trademarks. So as a developer or as a researcher or as a scientist, you can develop of course a product But as a business, you need to have certain kind of moats where you can protect it, from the competition. And this is where patents and trademarks play an important role. So if the technology is really novel, do file patents. You have to come up with, of course, innovative business model on how actually the product will sell. uh, Give a good thought about the funding, because the product development journey needs a lot of money. And then of course continuous product improvement would be part of the journey of any entrepreneur. I have listed down few funding sources. Maybe this can be of use for any product developer. You might know a lot of them, and there are something like follow the organization BIRAC, which gives BIG up to 50 lakhs. Then there is IIGP. Then there is a program called SBIRI and BIPP from BIRAC again. There is something called as Millennium Alliance, which gives up to 1 crore of funding. For students, there is a competition called as Able Best, and you might win up to 5 lakhs of money. Then there is something called as Design Impact Award from Tata. DST has a lot of program through Nidhi Prayas, and there are a lot of CSR funds available. And of course, you can get in touch with Venture Center or even PKC to access funds like these. So a lot has been told about the total struggles during the journey. Of course, there are ups and downs. You will at some point be very much devastated, and you may regret that what area you've entered into. But eventually, you have to be really passionate, and it is actually a rewarding journey though. So the next slide that I would want to show you is just to exemplify that the development of product, be it into diagnostics or any other, and particularly the journey of entrepreneurship, is actually a rewarding journey. This is the photo which is taken at the Science Museum in London. Here you see the modules, product USENS being placed, and what makes us really happy about this is that this sits next to the penicillin of discovered by Alexander Fleming. This is the original penicillin, which was discovered by Alexander Fleming. The product USENS sits next to that, and several others. So there is called as National Science Center in Delhi. We had the opportunity to showcase the product to our earlier Health Minister, Dr. Harshvardhan. You do get showcased in a lot of news. The people understand your views. People would want your inputs in a lot of policies. A special prize that we received was the India Innovation Growth Program, where we were sort of the top 5 social impact companies in India. Very special award, which was the Design Impact Award, where the fusion of design and technology for social good was actually being evaluated, and that's where we were one of the winners of this very prestigious award, and many others. So this is just to showcase that while this journey could be very daunting at times, you may feel dejected, you may feel lonely, sad, but then at some point it is also a very rewarding journey. Again, a very happy moment when we received the Best Startup Award at ISBACON. Again, you do get a chance to meet a lot of your icons. So my favorite icons, which I aspired and looked upon, Dr. Kiran Majumdar-Shaw and Mr. Ratan Tata. So we had the opportunity to actually meet with them, interact with them. So this is all part of the game. Some other things that a module, of course, developed was COVID antibody test that we started developing back in April 2020 when the pandemic just hit. So the government of India actually funded us to do that. And as Kita mentioned initially, we are the only Asian company in diagnostic space to have received funding from CARBAX, which has funded, by the way, 90 companies globally, but only one in India. So during the journey, we have been supported by a lot of organizations, and I always take this opportunity to thank them because without them, the development of the products being seen by you guys, the journey of module would have never been, never seen light of the day. So I really always thank these supporters for believing in the journey. Some of my learnings during the product development challenge, during the whole journey of entrepreneurship, I would want to share that with you quickly. So the first and the foremost is, of course, identifying your passion. Like as I said, I had the opportunity to pursue PhD and things like that, and a lot of people that work at module, they have such great careers and such great capabilities, and they have a lot of other opportunities, but the passion to work and create difference is what motivates them to come at 9 o'clock in the morning every day, and even on Saturdays and Sundays sometimes. The second important fact that I've realized is that you should of course keep reading, and this is something which will help you remain very positive and aware of what changes are happening into the ecosystem. The third, for youngsters, is that find great mentors and don't do those mistakes which people have done and learn from their mistakes. So of course, be in company of great people, be in touch with great mentors. PKC has an amazing profile of mentors, and even Venture Center, NCL, University of Pune. So this is a very excellent ecosystem in Pune. So be in touch with great people. This phrase of being shameless is something that I say with a pinch of salt, because as an entrepreneur you want your message to be conveyed, things to be done. So of course, don't hesitate in getting your things done in the most right manner, because when you will enter this journey, you will see that you want to pitch your idea to somebody and he is not having time. So you have to make that happen. You have to go and talk to them. So at some moments you will have to be shameless. Now, very important, enjoy your success. Often we have seen that there are small successes and you really wait for that big moment to come before you enjoy success. It shouldn't be like that. Smaller and success comes in bits and pieces, and every moment has to be enjoyed. And most importantly, I think you have to believe in yourself, your idea and your potential, because if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else would. So this is the AMR Crusaders that we say. Of course, this is slightly older slide. People have moved on, there have new people joined in, but there are few people who have always remained passionate with module. So with that, I would close today's talk, and I would be really happy to answer questions, because I like answering questions and being inquisitive. So thank you so much. Yeah, open to questions.
Thank you, Sachin. Thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. It is really helpful for, I think, all the audience, because you provide very informative, very knowledgeable talk about, like, the one I most liked is about to change the mindset about scientist and entrepreneur. Like, it's a very, very important thing to have with us, because whatever whatever the testing or the research we do in a closed setting or in a lab setting, but how it's going to give effect of a common people, because ultimate aim is we have to serve the community in at a large. So this is really wonderful to inform us about that, and really I love that slide. Any questions from the audience? So one question was in the chat box, like, is it required to take a ethical consent, means ethical approval from to test a device from individual or the organization?
So if you're actually validating the product in an external setting, like if you are going to a hospital, if you want to take the samples, then of course it is needed. Even I think if you want to do internal validations and you want to bring the samples from a healthcare setting, again a lab or hospital, then also a lot of hospitals or a lot of settings like these would want that approval of the institutional ethical committee.
Okay. And any so you did mention about the CDSCO and other approvals, NABL also. So apart from this, any other government approvals are needed for to have a device in the market? Apart from this, any other thing required?
So Ankita, I think it depends very much on the type of product you are building. So if it is a point of care test like what we are developing, then no. But then if it is a full-fledged medical device, or like if it's a instrument in development, then of course there would be some other testing that you will have to do, like the leakage current and things like that. So if it is for that, then there are some other certifications needed, but eventually the final governing body would still continue to remain CDSCO and DCGI.
One question is in chat box because the person is joined late. There is question like I have joined late, so I have a question on what had motivated you to design your product.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, so I really love answering that question. So of course, one was I mean, when we were actually developing the whole concept back from the NCL days, it was, targeting a different area altogether. But when a personal incident happened and we realized that this is a very, painful experience for people to continue taking random antibiotics, or in some cases taking antibiotics without need. So that's when we started to understand more deeply the problem of UTIs. And when we understood that the problem is actually grave, and still, even, in the 21st century, we do not have a very rapid diagnostic test, and we still rely on the age-old methods of doing culturing. At that moment, I think we decided, okay, let's take this plunge. So that's how, and eventually, the final design that you see of the USense product, it is designed like a key. So that key is something we tell our users to be the key to your health. So that's how the design philosophy for the product is. But the original thought and concept of why UTI and why USense was something like that.
and as you mentioned about the venture center thing, so how the venture center means to understand the audience also for their understanding, how the venture center play a role in having a developing entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship. So how it helped you to do the things.
I would sort of, take it a little back in the way that when I came as a student at NCL, uh, I used to just walk past that road because at that time, just after college, engineering, we didn't even have a bike or something. So we used to walk down to the area called as Sus Road where we used to live. So walking every day, we used to see, okay, this is something called as venture center, business incubator, thing like that, and we realized, okay, one day we should be there. Entering that campus, meeting Dr. Premnath was, I think, one of the most important things that happened. Right from, uh, refining the idea till the point that you get your first check in terms of funding, they supported us. While of course you have to run your own battle as an entrepreneur, but still there are some facilitations that they do. So they did help us actually, refine our pitch decks, how what funding agencies to target. So module received its first funding from BIG Barak, 50 lakhs, and that's how it started. But even before that, actually at NCL we received a director's fund which was for doing that internal research, that will this concept work. So from that moment till our incubation, which ended very recently, where we had our labs and everything in venture center, that kind of support they had. But overall, largely now venture center has a lot of things that you can get, like in terms of mentorship, in terms of, getting access to regulatory approvals, in terms of funding, what kind of fundings to target, how do you refine your pitch deck, if is your idea worthy enough to take forward. So I think they have the complete spectrum now. So for module, of course, they had a big role to play.
So next question was, how do you overcome false positive problems? And could you share some of troubleshooting steps at initial stage of product development? Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a very technical question. Maybe I would say that it inherently, if the technology has flaws, then you will have to optimize that. We did see some false positives. We had identified for what reasons actually they're coming, and it was a time-consuming and brain-taking process. I cannot technically tell what we did, but then it was again an iterative process. So you need to identify false positives are because of what, and if you can eliminate either them from the sample or adjust your diagnostic device in such a way that it overcomes that.
So one of the student has asked that if you want to have startup like Mahua wine preparation, should have first work in wine industry and have field study as I'm student.
So I don't have a very concrete answer. If I want to say about myself, I did not work in any industry post my engineering completion. And both me and Usman, the co-founders, we started just after doing our engineering. So not really necessary, but in some cases it makes sense that you have that experience. But I'm not very sure about your industry, but certainly like in our case, I think we learned, on the way. So not necessary that you have to do a job. If you can find somebody to work for you, or if you can find somebody who could be your co-founder and who has that experience, then I think that more than makes up for it.
Any more questions? So from
Ankita,
my, yeah.
we can have a group photo also.
Okay, sure.
Thank you all.
So, thank you so much, Sachin, for a great talk. And it was really nice interacting with you and to hear you at a brief about a journey of an entrepreneur, especially those who are coming from a scientific background and who has a research and a scientific approach to develop a device. So thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to have you as a guest speaker at PKC. Thank you so much, and thank you, audience, everyone who participated, who were there in the talk. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.